Reverend Dr. Raymont Anderson is an ordained Centers for Spiritual Living minister serving the Centers for Spiritual Living Greater Baltimore community as our spiritual director. As a lifelong learner with a passion for self development, personal transformation, transmutation, and transfiguration, he has frequently been referred to as a Renaissance man and visionary New Thought leader who makes complex metaphysical concepts readily understandable and applicable. His mission is to live, move, and be an active member of society who serves to educate, elucidate, and emancipate people and communities to awaken and empower themselves. ACTIVE is an acronym that stands for authentic, compassionate, transparent, inspired, vibrant, empowered. And he continues to live his bliss as a teacher, minister, author, workshop and seminar facilitator, visual artist, ASL interpreter, and ASL performing artist, mentor, father, grandfather, and more. I give you Reverend Dr. Ray.
Namaste and greetings, everyone. Happy Sunday. So, as you've already heard from Sue's pre service meditation when she introduced the theme, Living Everyday Wonder, this month we are talking about what it means to live everyday wonder via this thing called relationships. And today, specifically, we are talking about moving into the consciousness of the awareness of you and I are we. Now, why is that important? Because often in New Thought, we have this idea of pulling oneself up by your own bootstraps and rugged individualism. And we're transcending and moving beyond that to the collective, what it means to be in community, what it means to demonstrate conscious connection with one another. So our focus this week, the relationships that we have with our friends and our family and our community and everyone else. Those who may not be specifically in our community. Those who may not be specifically in our family. Those who we may not refer to as our friends. But we are nonetheless in relationship with them, if we really think about it. There are those that we refer to as strangers. Well, how are we in relationship with them? How do we relate to each person that we may refer to as a stranger? Because we encounter them in all kinds of ways, a glance, a head nod, a wave, a smile, a holding of the door for someone to enter a building. All of these ways, even though this person, we may never notice them or see them again. And yet, simply by crossing paths, God passing the path of God, God interacting with itself, relationship, even in that, things have shifted, things have moved. There's a gentleman by the name of William J. Toms, and we're going to rephrase this quote that he said. Be careful how you live. Be careful how you show up in life, because you may be the only representation of science of mind. You may be the only verse from the textbook, from the teaching. You may be the only affirmation or declaration of truth that someone gets to read or experience in life. Breathe. John Donne says, no man is an island, no person is an island entire of itself. Every person is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. No person exists in separation from God, entire to their own selves. Every person is part of the infinite oneness that is God. Each individual incarnation and yet individualized expression still part of the one. None of us can escape from being part of the one. And yet, in the middle of a crowd, while sitting at home with family and friends around, while having access on our smartphone to 4,629 phone numbers, email addresses, we still at times feel loneliness, separation, isolation, abandonment. Now, according to Psychology Today, loneliness is the state of distress or discomfort that results when one perceives a gap between one's desires for social connection and the actual experiences of it. So we perceive a gap between what we want to feel in terms of connection and what we actually feel in terms of connection. Think about many people who are in those aspects of community, the marginalized aspects of community. Think of the number of LGBTQ people who are closeted, who cannot be their true selves for fear of isolation or abandonment from friends and family, from community. The amount of loneliness that one feels by not being able to truly connect. Think of the number of people who, for whatever reason, do not feel connected with, able to be their full authentic selves, able to be with like-minded individuals who understand, not just on a superficial level, but truly understand you, truly understand the individual, truly understand their interests, their passions, their fears, their stresses, etc. Being able to open one's heart. Breathe. How many of us have either said or have expressed or have heard someone reference being alone in a crowd, saying, well, they wouldn't like me if they really knew me. They wouldn't like me. If they knew this about me, they wouldn't accept me. Yeah, I don't want to bother anyone. Like I'm not going to call, or I'm not going to, because I don't want to bother. I don't want to trouble. I don't want to be a burden to someone else. You know what? Why should they like me? I don't even like me. And so, even in the midst of being around folks, we feel lonely, isolated. And yet, Ernest Holmes gives us in the Science of Mind textbook, I am never alone and never lonely. For I have as companions and friends those people who are drawn to me by the ever active and immutable law of attraction. Now, I'm not going to read anymore, but you have access to the slides. All you got to do is reach out to Tracy or I. And of course, our amazing Sue Monahan goes over this in our Thursday night study group. But the important thing is to recognize that we have access to this thing called the law of attraction, whatever you want to call it. We have access to this ability to call to us those who are like-minded, those who are of the same community, those who we feel a bond. There are no strangers here, only friends that you haven't yet met. And one could say there are no enemies here, only friends you haven't yet encountered through a shift in their consciousness or a shift in our consciousness. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. But there are no strangers here. Breathe. Because there's this idea that says, one of the things that Sue mentioned in the pre-service meditation was this disconnect between recognizing that I am the beloved, I am the divine, I am spirit incarnating itself as me, and yet there's doubt and fear stress and anxiety. There's all that low self-worth, low self-esteem. And so sometimes we can be a stranger to our own selves. We can, we, in how we show up, we become our own greatest enemy. We are the adversary to our own joy and happiness, our own way of living, moving, and having our beingness at the highest level possible. We are the ones preventing it because we don't feel worthy, because we're not doing the work. We're not practicing the practice. Because it's easier to just go downstream. It's easy to sit in the consciousness of lack and scarcity and isolation. It's easier to sit in that. It's uncomfortable as all get out. It's uncomfortable. It's undesirable. And yet, because it's easier, it takes less effort, less practice per se, less conscious practice to shift out of it. Just like we know from Newton's laws of physics, an object not in motion will stay not in motion until something acts upon it. Sitting in lack and scarcity, you're going to sit there until something acts upon that and shifts and moves out of that. You need that push, that energy, that movement in order to get the evolutionary consciousness moving. So a big part of this whole idea of relationships, how do I have relationship with me? How do I show up in my own life? Where do I, regardless of what else is really, where do I hold this concept that I am the stranger, that I am the one who no one wants to know. I am the one who is unworthy of love and hugs and appreciation. Because there's this idea also in the general consciousness that we're all strangers to someone. Right? There's always going to be someone you don't know. I don't know your name. I don't know where you're from. I don't know your nationality. There's always going to be some aspect of, there's no way we're going to know every person on the face of the planet by name, remember their birth dates, etc. So there's always this aspect of, but being a stranger doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Being a stranger doesn't mean we have to set up borders and boundaries to keep the strangers elsewhere. You follow me with that? Being a stranger is not the bad thing. There's Jim Morrison in this song says, people are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone. Women seem wicked when you're unwanted. Streets are uneven when you're down. In other words, breathe. In other words, breathe again. In other words, where and how are you judging? Because we don't see things as they are. We don't see people as they are. We see them, we experience them as we are. As we are. Through our filters and our baggage. What was that? What did Sue say? You think you're enlightened, right? Uh-huh. Spend a week with your family. See how enlightened you are. See how many Om Shantis you are throwing out there. See how many Om Shanti. We don't see things, we don't see events, we don't see conditions as they are. We see them as we are. Our relationships are filtered through how we are being in the world. Bose Harrington says, too many of us have tried to tone down our weirdness, our strangeness, our uniqueness. Too many of us have tried to tone down our illumination, turn down our light for our friends or partners, only later to learn that we are actually suppressing the best things about us. There's no joy like the joy of being your full, authentic, unapologetic, strange self, and finding that there are people who love you just as you are for that. Why would the infinite show up as each and every one of us simply to be a carbon copy of each one of us? If you're familiar with Star Trek, sorry, Tracy, Star Wars, then you may remember the stormtroopers. She's laughing. The stormtroopers, what's one common characteristic? Not only do they all look alike from the armor, but in the original, they are all clones of one particular person. They're carbon copies of. Now, granted, they have their own personalities and stuff, but they're carbon copies. Why would the infinite show up as carbon copies? For what purpose? We are here to be divine, unique incarnations of. Blessed are the weird people, for they are the poets, the misfits, the artists, the writers, and music makers, the dreamers, and the outsiders. They force us, encourage us, invite us to see the world differently. And in seeing the world differently and having that vision, we then make the world different. We make a world that works for all. Breathe. There's this passage in Leviticus that says, you shall treat the stranger, right, who sojourns with you, who is living among you, as you treat those who are native or native born among you. And you shall love that person, that stranger, as you love yourself. We don't see others the way they are. We see them as we are. So if I do not have love for myself, how do I love this other person? Treat the foreigner, treat the stranger, treat the other person as you are able first to treat yourself. And then treat them with that love and respect and honoring that God deserves. But if we are coming from this consciousness of separate, lack, fear, low self-worth, then it is very challenging to love ourselves, first of all, but then to extend that to loving someone else. So our invitation is to not only look beyond the walls in terms of making these connections, but to remove the walls and become a leader who creates bridges, because we are all those people on the other side of that. So rather than being those people, let's just be the people. No matter where we are, no matter who is, we are the people. We are people. We are the infinite showing up in, through, and as everything and everyone. In Matthew, it says, and Yeshua told him, you shalt love the Lord thy God with thy whole heart and with thy whole soul and with thy whole mind, and you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, let's take that into account by referencing what Ernest Holmes says regarding this idea of the only God you will ever know is the one you will discover within yourself. And the only God you and I will ever know is the one that we embody. So, taking that reference point, let's revisit. And Yeshua said to them, you shall love yourself, for you are the Lord God incarnating. Love yourself with your whole heart. Love yourself with your whole soul. And love yourself with your whole mind. And then love your neighbor as yourself, because you recognize your neighbor as God also incarnating as them. Breathe. Because on a certain level, this is asking a lot. Because it seems common sense. Love yourself. Love yourself. Take care of yourself. Nurture yourself. Understand your own self-worth and value. But when you have had years and years of indoctrination, it's not that easy to shake away from in order to recognize love of and for yourself. And from the overflow, you now are able to love and care and be supportive to others. As Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, let us build bridges, not walls. Let us build bridges within our own selves, bridges between our hearts and our minds, our bodies and our spirit. Let us build bridges so that we can then connect with others. Ernest Holmes says, love is the only final security in the universe. Love is the greatest healing power in the universe, the only thing that binds people together in a community of spirit. Love. Love is that. Are we willing to erase the borders and boundaries that separate us? Even while others are in the process of crafting and drawing more of them, are we willing to do the work to erase them? Edwin Markham says, he drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. Are we willing to draw circles and envelop and bring others into the consciousness of love? Every person is an incarnation of God. And since each person is an individual, everyone is a unique incarnation. Everyone is a unique incarnation. We are not meant to be carbon copies. We are not meant to be carbon copies. We are meant to be unique and special. Not more special than anyone else, but special in our own right, unique in our own right. My love goes out to everyone in the world. But does it? My love goes out to everyone in the world. But does it? My love goes out to everyone in the world. But does it? See, there's this movie called The Best of Enemies, which is based upon a real life story where these two individuals, Ann Atwater, civil rights activist, and C.P. Ellis, at one time the exalted cyclops of his local KKK. And through a series of events, these two individuals became friends. You say that again? These two individuals, Black woman, exalted cyclops of the KKK, became friends. My love goes out to the entire world. Okay, yeah, I hear you. But then there's Zernona Clayton, civil rights legend, very active, friend and mentor, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you know, his words still ring in her ears. If you can change a man's heart, if you can change a person's heart, then you can regulate, you can change their behavior. If you can change their heart, if you can change their consciousness, then you can change their behavior. There was this one day where Clayton returns home to find dozens of cars outside of her house, police cars and TV cameras and all kinds of stuff. And what had happened was, as it says, it turned out that they were looking for me, she says, because Calvin Craig had a press conference earlier announcing that he was coming out of the Klan. He was denouncing the Klan, and he credited a Black woman with changing his negative attitudes. And I was that Black woman. And my love goes out to the entire world. How? But how? if you can change a person's heart, you can change their behavior. If you can change their heart. Daryl Davis speaks of, recruiting and shifting and becoming friends, recruiting friends of KKK members and collecting their robes as they surrender and denounce the Klan. And one of his biggest things that he confronts them with is, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And when someone begins to marinate on that, how can I hate you when I don't even know you? I'm hating a concept. And then the conversation begins. The dialogue deepens. Because if you can change a person's heart, then you can change their behavior. My love goes out to the entire world. Blessed are the misfits, the music makers, such as Daryl Davis, who has converted hundreds of former KKK members over an expansive time of 30 years. Blessed are those who are willing to step outside of convention and let their love be a transformative power. Breathe. What do these two people have in common? Michael Kent, former neo-Nazi, and Dr. Bernice King, the daughter of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. What do they have in common? How in the world could two people such as them become friends? Well, let's introduce the person that became in the middle, Tiffany Whittier. She was the probation officer for Michael Kent while he was in prison. And because of how Tiffany saw him, how she saw through the tattoos, the swastikas, how she saw through all of the rhetoric and racist dogma and saw to the man's heart and spoke to the man's heart. And because she saw him as someone different, he was then able to see himself as someone different. And not only did they develop a respect and a friendship, but because of that, eventually, the daughter of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Bernice King, Dr. Bernice King, she and this gentleman became friends. And how does this happen? Because of grace. Straight and simple grace. But what is grace? When we talk about it in terms of this, what are we talking about? We're talking about this understanding, this godliness, realized, always compassionately expressing. Godliness realized. When you realize and understand who and what you are, then you have no choice but to always compassionately express that knowing. And it moves through you. So you have that compassion for yourself. You have that love for yourself. You have grace for yourself. And because you have it for yourself, you are then able to extend it to, I give, I shine, I share my love with the world, because I know that as I do so, as I change the hearts, the consciousness of others, then their behaviors change as well. And a world that works for all requires a level of consciousness that thus far has never existed before. Because the world that we live in now has never existed as it does now. This moment is the only time this moment has ever been and ever will be. Never before have so many people on the planet had the news and mass information, abundance of social connections so readily available on these little microcomputers or smartphones that we carry pretty much everywhere we go. And because of this oversaturation of media and news and stuff, it's easy to lose connection. We think we are connected, but because of this oversaturation, we actually are less connected. So in order to manifest a new world, a world that works, then we must evolve into a new consciousness. a consciousness that calls us into true, authentic, deeper levels of connection, both in person and via technology. You know, this pandemic had pushed us further away physically, and yet we came together in powerful ways virtually and digitally. So today we are called to connect with others in new and more powerful ways, to communicate, to collaborate, to cooperate with others in wonderful and meaningful ways, ways that nurture, ways that empower, ways that recognize, realize, and engage, that pledge us and bind us to ourselves and with one another. Because of this unconditional, immutable, irrefutable, and irresistible power of love. Breathe. This week's practice: 1. Journal about what might shift in the collective consciousness if we refer to everything as ours. Everyone is our family. Every CSL is our CSL. Every person, our family. Every person, our friend. Every country, every nation is a part of, it's our country, it's our planet, it's ours. Breathe. What might this stir within us? Greater levels of compassion and stewardship? What might this stir within us when we recognize not only am I not simply my brother's keeper or my sister's keeper, or the keeper of my gender neutral, gender rich sibling, but I am them and they are me. We are each other. What might shift in the collective consciousness if that was the paradigm we came from? 2, when I think of other people who are not like me, people who I may know very little about, who comes to mind? For example, suppose I am a cisgender white heterosexual man. Do I know any transgender women of color? If not, am I willing and able to have a conversation, to get to know someone, and ultimately find a bond that connects us and build a relationship or friendship? Am I willing to know someone, to meet someone who isn't like me? Step outside of my comfort zone, because that individual is my brother, is my sister, is my gender rich sibling, and they are me. And then lastly, have a conversation with 3 people about what prevents us from having these kinds of conversations and discussions about such things as faith and religion, sex, money, and politics. What prevents us from having conversations about those things? Because all of them are ways that we as humans interact within the world. Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, said, anything that is mentionable is manageable. If we can get to the place of having conversation about everything, then we can get to each other's hearts. We can get to each other's consciousness. We can get to a world that works for all. But for as long as we put things, we don't talk about that. We can't talk about that. Then we don't grow, we don't evolve. Each of these things, as I said, relates to how we show up as humans. What is it about them that causes friction and distance rather than understanding and connection? Have a conversation about each of these with your 3 people. Talk about faith and religion. Talk about sex. Talk about money and politics. Go in and talk. As Gurdjieff says, live a life of friction. Let yourself be disturbed as much as possible, but observe. And lastly, in line with that, it's the troubled waters where healing occurred. You've heard me mention multiple times, wade in the water. God is going to trouble. God is going to friction the waters. And it is in that friction, that agitated water, that clothes are clean. It is in that agitated water that healing occurs. It is in that agitation. We are here to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Breathe. This week's declaration, I will say it first, and if you feel in alignment, say it with me on the second go round. I celebrate the we, which is intimately one with itself. Together. I celebrate the we, which is intimately one with itself. Breathe. Let's anchor in the consciousness of knowing. Knowing that there is only one power and one presence called by many names, and that very power and presence is who and what each one of us is. It is what smiles this face. It is what sees through these eyes. It is what moves these hands. It is what beats this heart. It is what lives this thing called life. It is what is acting upon itself, because there is only that which it is. The divine, love, loving itself, living itself, breathing itself, showing up as itself. And that self is you. That self is me. That self is we. And right here and right now, we are the makers of music. We are the ones who imagine, who envision a world of peace and love, camaraderie, joy, a world that works for all. We anchor in this knowing that the law says yes. And because the law says yes, we know that everything from Sue's opening meditation to Safi's pre-service music, all the way through Tracy's hosting, Sue's in-service spiritual practice, Safi's music, my talk, all the way till now, and what comes after. It is all already answered prayer. So we allow it to be exactly that by saying, Amen, Ashe, Aho, and so it is. Amen.